Impeachment inquiry. Testimony begins today on Capitol Hill regarding the whistleblower's complaint into a call between the White House and Ukraine. President Donald Trump also is weighing in. Protecting religious freedom. Pope Francis and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo meet at the Vatican. Healthy debate. A church leader acknowledges criticism surrounding the upcoming synod on the Amazon. We have a report from Rome. And the power of forgiveness. A guilty verdict in Texas leads to a moving moment in a courtroom. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, October 3rd, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Lawmakers question the diplomat at the center of the President Trump impeachment inquiry. House committees heard testimony today from the former special U.S. envoy to Ukraine. It's the first in what's expected to be a series of interviews with officials inside and outside the State Department. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi leads our team coverage. Jason?
Wyatt, Kurt Volker shared with lawmakers texts as well as photos. He answered questions from 3 different House committees. He used to be the special envoy to Ukraine, a part-time position with no pay, but he resigned last week in the wake of that whistleblower complaint. The whistleblower complaint says Kurt Volker reportedly provided advice to the Ukrainian leadership about how to navigate the demands that the president had made of Mr. Zelensky. President Donald Trump made that request one day earlier in a phone call with the Ukrainian president.
Nobody pushed me.
Today, Volker navigates the halls of Congress and answers hours and hours of questions behind these closed doors. Republicans inside say it helps their side.
Not one thing he has said comports with any of the Democrats' impeachment narrative. Not one thing.
Yesterday, a mysterious delivery to Capitol Hill. The State Department Inspector General asked for an urgent meeting with congressional staffers. The invite said it was about the State Department and Ukraine.
How was the briefing? Any other updates?
No comment.
The inspector passed out packets. Maryland Democrat Jamie Raskin says it raises more questions.
It is a package of propaganda and disinformation and conspiracy theories. The real question is, where did it come from and how did it end up in our lap right now?
Lawmakers are on break for 2 weeks and face their voters. New York Democrat Max Rose represents a district President Trump won by 10 points. Now he says he's finally supporting the impeachment investigation.
The American people have a right to know if their president used the power of his or her office to get a foreign power to interfere in our elections.
Up next tomorrow, the Inspector General of the Intelligence Committee will testify. He's the one who originally handled the whistleblower's complaint. And there's lots of questions swirling here on Capitol Hill, like the New York Times reporting that the whistleblower originally went to Democratic staff before going to the Inspector General. Wyatt?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. It's not just Ukraine. President Trump is now calling on China to probe the Bidens. He made the comments to reporters outside the White House this morning. White House correspondent Mark Irons was there and joins us now with more on the president's comments. Mark?
Wyatt, by publicly encouraging China to investigate his political rival Joe Biden, the president is affirming the approach he used in private with Ukraine's president, which has led to this impeachment inquiry. The day at the White House, the president talked about allegations against him and said why the Bidens are to blame.
Well, I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation into the Bidens.
President Trump says Ukraine isn't the only country that should investigate Joe Biden and his son Hunter.
And by the way, likewise, China should start an investigation into the Bidens. Because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine.
The president alleges Hunter Biden received millions in corrupt foreign business dealings in Ukraine and China at the time his father was vice president. He's not shying away from the impeachment inquiry into him or from critics who accuse him of abusing his power. Instead, he keeps turning attention to the former vice president and his son.
If it were me, I would recommend that they start an investigation into the Bidens.
Joe Biden says there is no truth to the charges made against him. The Democratic presidential hopeful is pushing back.
You're not going to destroy me, and you're not going to destroy my family. I don't care how much money you spend, Mr. President. or how dirty the attacks get.
President Trump is using Twitter to go after his critics. He calls Adam Schiff a lowlife who should resign. Representative Schiff is the lead Democrat leading this impeachment inquiry. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. At least 21 people are dead following anti-government protests in Iraq. Police fired bullets into the air and used tear gas to disperse a few hundred demonstrators. Officials also have imposed a new curfew in Baghdad, Iraq's capital. The unrest came on the heels of 2 days of deadly violence that has gripped the country. Pope Francis names one of Italy's leading anti-mafia prosecutors to lead the Vatican's criminal tribunal. The appointment comes just days after police raided the offices of the Secretariat of State. Officials also searched the Holy See's financial watchdog group. A report says the raids were related to suspicious transactions, specifically the Vatican's real estate holdings in London. Pope Francis met Secretary of State Mike Pompeo today at the Vatican. The two discussed protecting religious freedom around the world, particularly protecting vulnerable Christian communities in the Middle East. They also exchanged gifts. Among the presents, the Holy Father gave Secretary Pompeo a copy of Laudato Si', the Pope's encyclical on protecting the environment. A top Vatican official acknowledges criticism ahead of the upcoming synod on the Amazon, but he says a healthy debate is part of the process.
È necessario ascoltare e non giudicare.
Cardinal Lorenzo Baltiseri is the Secretary General of the Senate. He says he welcomes criticism. The Cardinal spoke at a press conference today outlining the upcoming meetings in the Vatican. Susanna Pinto is executive producer for EWTN News. She joins us from Rome, where she'll be covering the Synod. Susie, 185 people, mostly bishops, will take part in this special meeting on the Amazon that starts next week. As I mentioned, there has been some criticism. What's the controversy?
Wyatt, that controversy centers around a proposal in the working document ahead of the Synod. That working document outlines what the discussion during the 3-week meeting will focus on. And one of those proposals is to consider ordaining married men to the priesthood. The region of the Amazon is a vast region, and many areas don't have priests to minister to the faithful there. So one of the many issues that will be discussed during the Synod is whether or not to ordain married men, or viri probati, tested men, to the priesthood. Today, the Vatican said that the working document is just that. It's a working document. It is not a papal document or a document that has magisterial weight or teaching authority. So the Vatican is really asking people to listen and not to judge yet ahead of this meeting.
So when it comes to these discussions, in addition, the role of women also came up, I understand. Tell us more about that.
The question is being raised why women religious are not allowed to vote in the Synod. And today, a top Vatican official said that the Synod will operate according to the Code of Canon Law, which does not allow for women to vote in synods. But the same Vatican official, Cardinal Baldassarre, did make note that there's a record number of women taking part in the Synod. 35 of those 185 participants are women, and many of them are women religious.
Very interesting. Well, as you know, Susie, it's been a busy month for Pope Francis. He'll be creating 13 new cardinals Saturday before the Synod, and I understand the press got to meet some of them today.
EWTN got the chance to meet some of the cardinal designates. They were available in the Holy See press office, and we spoke to one of them, who's from Spain, Bishop Miguel Ángel Ayuso Guisot. He is the head of the Vatican Council for Interreligious Dialogue, and he says that dialogue between different religions is more important than ever today.
Humanity is sick. I see a wounded humanity, and therefore we are in need of different followers of the different religious traditions to come together in order to heal the wounds of humanity.
We also spoke to Archbishop Michael Fitzgerald. He is a former Vatican ambassador to Egypt, and we asked him how Catholic leaders can encourage the faithful in a world that is more and more hostile to religion. Here's what he told us.
We have to tell people to but exhort them, to encourage them to take their faith seriously, not be afraid to talk about their faith, share, but to do this in the way that St. Peter says in his letter, with courtesy and respect.
Archbishop Fitzgerald and 12 others will be made a cardinal by Pope Francis this Saturday, and it'll be the beginning of a very busy month here in Rome.
A very busy month, and we have our whole team there from different EWTN branches to cover all of it. Susanna Pinto, executive producer for EWTN News. Thanks, Susie.
You're welcome.
Coming up, continuing analysis of the impeachment inquiry into the president and a message of forgiveness.
I know if you go to God and ask him, he will forgive you.
Inside a Texas courtroom. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is asking Speaker Nancy Pelosi to suspend the House impeachment inquiry into the president until she establishes more, quote, transparent and equitable rules and procedures. In his letter to Pelosi, McCarthy goes on to write, the swiftness and recklessness with which you have proceeded has already resulted in committee chairs attempting to limit minority participation in scheduled interviews, calling into question the integrity of such an inquiry. Joining me now to offer his analysis is Christopher Bedford, editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller and the author of The Art of the Donald. Chris, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
The House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, calling for the impeachment inquiry to be suspended as a result of what he's been saying. What's your reaction to all of what he's been saying, first off? And then, do you agree with him that things are moving way too fast?
Well, I think it's rushed, and there's a reason that it's rushed. It's because the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, didn't want this impeachment inquiry to go forward. She's one of the few Democrats in the House who seems to think that they could actually win this upcoming election, and that's what Democrats ought to be focused on. But it seems, and by all accounts I've heard from the Hill, that she may have lost control of her caucus. It's gotten too much, and they finally found something that was foreign entanglement that they could bring up again and push for impeachment, so she had to just let the floodgates open. But we knew since before, as soon as President Trump was the nominee, Democrats were calling for him to be impeached if he became president. So this game plan has been a long time coming, and Republicans are going to fight it every step of the way, just like Democrats fought it every step of the way when Bill Clinton was impeached.
The impeachment inquiry at this point seems to have a narrow focus. It's about President Trump's conversation with the president of Ukraine and his request to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter. Does this narrow focus stemming from a whistleblower complaint really make it more or less likely that this inquiry is actually going to move forward?
It will move forward through the House of Representatives, based simply on partisanship. I could not possibly tell you how talking to the head of Ukraine about Joe Biden's conspiracy in Ukraine is somehow a high crime or a misdemeanor, which would be one of the things outside of treason that is an impeachable offense. The Democrats are going to have to make that case to the American people, and it's a difficult one to make because it's foreign policy. In a country that most people who haven't played the game Risk have never really heard of that much. But it does fit in with the Democrats' larger push of foreign entanglement with Russia, and it fits in with that general region of the world. So the groundwork has been laid. Most of this is going to be fought in public relations. I guarantee it'll pass the House, and what happens after that is up to Mitch McConnell.
You've studied the president. You know he's been on the offensive, going after Democrats, the whistleblower, the media. What are your thoughts about his strategy now, especially in light of the fact that he's been accused of abuse of power?
Well, yesterday was the first time during his press conference I've ever seen the president lose his temper. He's been angry before, but I think he lost his temper. He's an absolute expert at controlling what the media is speaking about and changing the subject and throwing wild cards and basically tricking a lot of reporters. But this time, impeachment seems to be the number one thing. Everyone from the cold calculating minds at NPR to the more frantic minds at CNN are going nuts, and the Democrats are all about it. So the president is going to have to focus on that. And China, he's pushing it out into the open. He's saying, like he said before, China, Australia, Ukraine, but it's going to give ammunition to his enemies because China is an enemy country, although everyone knows, as President Trump has always said, China is an enemy of his.
Looking ahead now, President Trump travels today to Florida, where he's speaking about Medicare in front of a Republican-friendly audience. How significant is today's trip in changing the focus for voters?
I think it's only significant in changing his own focus, which is important. When you're completely besieged in your mansion in Washington, surrounded by Republicans are maybe looking for orders and Democrats are on the attack and a very hostile media, it can be difficult, and it's a total siege mentality. To go down to a sprawling outdoor village in Florida that's a Republican stopover filled with friendly faces to talk about your policy, that's the kind of important thing that he might need, maybe with some golfing. But it's certainly not going to move the ball for any of the people who have been trying to impeach this president since he came in, and that's going to continue to be the story.
So many interesting aspects of this story. Christopher Bedford, editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller and the author of The Art of the Donald. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you.
A stunning moment in a Texas courtroom after a former Dallas police officer was sentenced to 10 years in prison for killing a man in his own home. It was a moment of forgiveness, all centered around Christ.
10 years imprisonment in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice.
The sentence left Botham Jean's family dismayed and shocked. Amber Geiger was sentenced to 10 years in prison yesterday.
No justice, no peace!
Outside the courtroom, the sentence angered protesters.
The police department around the country has done to our people. This is not a joke. This is our lives.
But at the same time, inside the courtroom, a dramatic scene was unfolding.
I forgive you.
Botham Jean's 18-year-old brother, Brant, spoke directly to the former Dallas police officer who killed his brother.
And I wasn't gonna ever say this in front of my family or anyone, but I don't even want you to go to jail. I want the best for you. Because I know that's exactly what both of them would want you to do. And the best would be give your life to Christ.
He told Geiger he didn't want to see her spend the rest of her life in prison and had one request before she was taken to her jail cell.
I love you as a person, and I don't wish anything bad on you. I don't know if this is possible, but can I give her a hug, please? Please?
Yes.
Geiger's attorney called it humbling and the most amazing moment he had ever seen in a courtroom. The emotion lingered long after the case ended. Judge Tammy Kemp hugged Botham Jean's family and, in a rare move, also hugged Amber Geiger and gave her a Bible.
You can have mine. I got 3 or 4 more at home. This is the one I use every day before I go to work. This is your job for the next month.
After the sentencing, the Jean family attended a church service. Bertram Jean, Botham and Brant's father, said the moment in court touched him.
They have been taught to love, forgive, be merciful to others. That's what we grew up in the church, right? That's what we learned. And so that was inculcated in them.
Amber Geiger says she shot Botham Jean after mistaking his apartment for her own. She will be eligible for parole in 5 years. Up next, the latest on the months-long protests in Hong Kong. And Pope Francis tells the faithful how they can be filled with joy. New developments in the anti-government protests in Hong Kong. The teenager who was the first victim of a police gunfire has been charged with rioting and attacking police. The 18-year-old who was shot in the chest remains in the hospital in stable condition. There are also calls for the government to ban demonstrators from wearing masks. Authorities believe eliminating masks might help subdue the rising violence in the former British territory. Earlier this week, more than 50 people were injured in an alarming escalation of bloodshed in the months-long protests. Join me now via Skype is Johnny Patterson, director of Hong Kong Watch, a London-based group focused on human rights in Hong Kong. Johnny, welcome into the broadcast. The dramatic increase in violence on Tuesday, is it because mainland China was celebrating the 70th anniversary of communist rule, or is this just the new normal in Hong Kong?
Well, what I perceive there to have been is a steady escalation in recent months. So what started as very peaceful protests have escalated slowly, and every time the group that are leading the escalation are the police. What we see on Tuesday was that the Chinese government obviously allowed the police to escalate even further as a result of the fact it was the anniversary. So a bit of both.
Very alarming indeed. As you are probably well aware, in the United States, we have been accustomed to hearing about suspects being shot by police, unfortunately. Why was the shooting, though, Tuesday in Hong Kong such a surprise? It made headlines.
I think the main reason is the first time it's happened, it happened to an 18-year-old. And it was another example of the deep injustice of the way these protests have gone. The young man who was shot in what was clearly a disproportionate attack on him by the police officer is now facing riot charges of up to 10 years. Meanwhile, the police officer is likely to walk free and be allowed to do exactly the same thing next week.
And of course, that's sparking even more protests. Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam may consider tomorrow whether to ban protesters from wearing face masks, as I mentioned. What effect, if any, would a ban have? Is that a big deal?
It's a big deal, and the reason it's a big deal is because of the way she's doing it. So she's going to try and pass this act through emergency powers, and that will give her the power to do whatever she wants. So it starts with banning face masks, but it could lead to martial law or even worse. And this is only likely to stir further reconciliation.
Yeah. Well, we know that Catholics and other Christians in the past have marched with protesters, but lately, have they been playing any role in the demonstrations?
I think the Catholics and other Christians have been at the forefront of the pan-democratic, the pro-democracy movement for a long time in Hong Kong, and they continue to have a really important role. You probably heard the Sing Hallelujah Lord was one of the anthems at the start of the protest, and people like Cardinal Zen and Marty and others continue to play a really important symbolic role as almost moral leadership in the movement.
And I'm sure they'll continue to do so, to stand up for the people and their individual rights. Johnny Patterson, Director of Hong Kong Watch, coming to us from London. Thanks so much, Johnny.
Thank you.
City council members in Jackson, Mississippi have enacted a new law to limit the noise outside of the state's only abortion clinic. The city gets complaints during protests outside the facility when pro-lifers use bullhorns and clinic members blast music to try and drown them out. Local businesses say the commotion is a headache for their customers. The ordinance in Jackson is set to take effect in the next few weeks. It's likely to face a legal challenge. Tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, host Catherine Hadro discusses the Trump administration's pro-life stance. It was highlighted at the United Nations General Assembly in New York.
The U.S. is coming alongside and backing our other pro-life allies internationally and saying we're not going to have the UN be interfering and asserting an alleged right to abortion.
You can see more of the interview tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on EWTN. Visit EWTN.com for more airing times. Finally tonight, Pope Francis tells the faithful to pay attention to the Word of God, because if we do, it will fill us with joy.
Sto attento alla parola di Dio. Lascio che tocchi il mio cuore.
During his daily Mass today at the Vatican, the Holy Father warns us not to let the readings go on in one ear and just out the other. Instead, if we pay attention, we'll become stronger and the message will touch our hearts. Sounds like some sound advice to conclude our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.